When my younger brother Grant came to visit from Denver, he froze in the middle of a house that used to be full of laughter. No chairs, no table, no photo of my husband on the wall. No familiar smell of food, just the cold hum of an empty refrigerator and the weak breathing of a mother who's lived 70 years. Grant turned back to me, eyes red. "Paula, you're living like this? With a $7,000 pension each month?" Before I could answer, Nolan, my son, stepped out from the other room, arms crossed, and said in a flat voice like he was stating a fact, "I give all of Mom's pension to my wife. She manages it better than Mom." The air in the house froze. Grant stood still for a few seconds, then slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, his eyes calm to the point of frightening. And what he did next would paralyze Nolan and turn this house into a crime scene of truth. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Paula Whitaker, 70, a widow, living in a small house in the suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri. This two-story place was where my husband Robert and I built our life, with a lavender garden he tended every morning. After Robert passed, I lived alone for more than 10 years, relying on a $7,000 monthly pension from my 42 years as head nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. I never imagined that at this age, in the middle of America, I could be hungry. When Grant stepped through the door, I saw raw confusion in his eyes. He walked a circle around the living room, scanning as if searching for something familiar. The gray fabric sofa that used to sit under the window, the oak dining table Robert and I bought when we first married, the wedding photo in the hallway. All of it. Gone. He opened the fridge. Empty. Only an expired carton of milk, half a stick of butter, and a packet of instant noodles. The kitchen was dead cold. No coffee smell, no toaster sound, no sign of life in the house that had once been the warmest place I knew. Grant turned back, his voice rough. "Paula, where are you? Where's the sister I know? Tell me what's going on here." I could only press my lips together. Any excuse felt small under the gaze of the person who once called me the strongest big sister in the world. I didn't have the strength to explain. I just looked around the empty house and wondered, how did I let it come to this? Then Nolan appeared. My only son, now 38, walked out with a confident posture and a thin smile. Grant looked at him, waiting for an explanation. And Nolan said, in a tone so casual it was chilling, "I give all of Mom's pension to Sloan. She manages it better than Mom. Mom just needs to rest and stay out of the money stuff." Grant blinked, stunned. He looked up at me, waiting for my reaction, but I just stood there too exhausted to argue. Nolan sat down, poured himself a glass of water, while I watched my thin hands start to shake. I knew Grant wanted to explode, but instead he slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, and set it on the table. His eyes were dangerously calm, the kind of calm that means the truth is about to surface. "All right," he said quietly. "We're going to talk, but not the way you think." No one in that house understood that moment was the starting point for turning my entire life back over. Before Grant arrived, I had lived through 13 months of hell in my own home. After Nolan lost his job, he and his wife Sloan moved in for a few months to save on rent. I believed that. I still remember the day they moved in, Sloan smiling sweetly, saying, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll help with cooking and cleaning. We'll be like a big family." I believed her. I believed everything. But a few months quickly turned into, "We're staying." Soon, I was pushed out of my own master bedroom to make room for them. I moved into the smaller room, telling myself, that's what a mother should do. Then it started. Sloan suggested I hand my bank card to Nolan so he can feel useful. I hesitated, but seeing my son slumped on the couch, head down, shoulders shaking with the weight of unemployment, I couldn't say no. I handed over the card. and with it, I handed over my financial freedom. At first, things seemed fine. Bills were paid on time, the fridge was stocked. Nolan even gave me $100 and said, "Buy yourself something nice." But a few weeks later, the account password was changed, and I couldn't see the statements anymore. When I asked, Nolan laughed. "Don't worry, Mom, I manage it better. Seniors get scammed a lot, let me handle it." I wanted to believe, so I kept quiet. The food started to thin out. The things I liked disappeared. Chicken, salmon, fresh fruit. In their place were instant noodles, crackers, and what Sloane called a light dinner. Whenever I asked why, she said, "At your age, eating less is healthy and fresh stuff is expensive." I didn't realize I was being starved on purpose. The house was stripped bit by bit. The sofa where Robert read the paper, the oak table where we hosted Christmas, the wedding photo, the keepsakes from a lifetime of work, all gone to cover expenses. So I started keeping notes. I hid a small notebook in an old drawer where I wrote down dates, amounts, and what had disappeared. I also hid a backup phone just to photograph and record conversations when I knew something was wrong. I thought I was being cautious. Like Robert used to say, "No one protects you better than you, Paula." But honestly, I just wanted to believe that if anything happened, at least I'd have proof, and a thin hope that someone would notice I was being worn down. That someone turned out to be Grant. Grant has always been perceptive. After Robert passed, he called often, but for more than half a year I dodged his calls, always saying I was busy or fine. I was afraid that if he came, he'd see what I couldn't face, but he came anyway. And what he saw in this house, the emptiness, the cold, and my hollowed-out face told him it wasn't just a rough patch. I remember that moment like a photograph. The late-day light slanting through the window onto the bare floor, and Grant saying quietly, "Paula, this isn't a family issue anymore. This is a crime." He pulled out his phone and called the two people he trusted most, attorney Arthur Hale, Robert's old friend, and doctor Camila Ortiz, a geriatric specialist he'd worked with in an elder care program. I didn't stop him. I just sat there, hands clasped, heart beating slow and heavy. From the moment Grant hung up, I knew my silent, compliant life was over. Today, every word and every invisible scar would be brought into the light. A knock came just minutes later. Grant turned to me, voice firm but gentle. "Sis, today is the day this ends. They turned you into a shadow, but I'm going to bring you back to yourself." I gripped the edge of the chair, looking around the empty house. For the first time in months, the air felt different. Not the cold smell of an empty fridge, but the scent of hope slipping back in. I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and let out a long breath. "All right," I said, voice low but clear. "If the truth needs telling, I'll tell it. From the beginning. From the day I thought my love could fix everything." And so, in an empty house in Kansas City, my story began, the story of a mother who loved her son so much she lost herself, and the journey to reclaim her life from her own misplaced trust. I once believed that if I worked hard and lived decently, life would return fairness. Across 42 years as a nurse at Lakeview Community Hospital, I worked through countless night shifts, blaring sirens and hands that went cold in my arms. I was used to the smell of antiseptic, the squeak of gurney wheels on, tile, the white lights falling on faces, waiting to be saved. People used to ask me, "Paula, aren't you afraid of night shifts?" I smiled. I was afraid of the dark, but I was more afraid of not being there to help someone through it. I started at the hospital when I was 28, 2 years after marrying Harold. He was a civil engineer. I worked odd hours, often going in at dusk and coming home when the sun was up. Whenever I came home, he'd leave a warm pot of coffee and a note on the kitchen table. "Remember to eat breakfast. I left bread in the toaster." Our life was simple but full. Harold wasn't a talker, but his eyes were gentle, like every bit of my exhaustion was worth it. Then, one April morning, a light rain falling, I was handing off a shift when a call came from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the line shook. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm sorry. Your husband had a massive heart attack. We did everything we could." I collapsed in the hospital. The hallway, the place where I'd saved so many lives, but this time, the one who left was part of me. By the time I arrived, they said he'd only had time to say one last line to the attending doctor. "Tell my wife I'm proud of her. I've carried that sentence ever since." I don't remember how I got through the days that followed. The funeral passed quickly. Friends, co-workers, neighbors came to offer condolences, then left. I cleaned the house we used to laugh in and folded shirts that still smelled like his cologne. I thought that without Nolan, I might not have had a reason to get up in the morning. Nolan was 22 then, a senior majoring in business. He had Harold's calm and thoughtful eyes. I poured my love and my grief into him. Every time I went to work, I told myself, one more shift, one more week, so my son won't go without. I took more nights, cut every personal expense, hardly went out. No new dresses, no hair dye, no vacations for nearly 10 years. Everything so Nolan could graduate and go further than I ever could. I remember his graduation day clearly. I went straight from the hospital to the auditorium, still in my scrub top that smelled like rubbing alcohol. When Nolan stepped up to receive his diploma, he scanned the room and found me standing in the back, smiling with tired eyes. He held the diploma high and shouted, "Mom, I did it." The whole hall clapped. I smiled too, tears falling before I could wipe them. For the first time in years, my effort felt like it meant something. After that, Nolan quickly landed a job at a well-known logistics firm in the city. I was proud he was young, capable, full of promise. He started talking about the future, about getting married, buying a house. I nodded, both happy and anxious. I still remember the night he brought her home. "Sloane Parker, someone I met at a client conference," he said. "She's in marketing, smart and ambitious." Sloane reached out to shake my hand, voice soft but cool. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker." She was beautiful. Brown hair perfectly curled, a cream silk dress, expensive perfume. Her gaze made me feel both seen and judged. I kept a polite smile, poured tea, and tried to believe every modern woman carries a bit of pride. That night, while washing dishes, I asked Nolan, "Are you sure? She seems a little cold." He laughed. "Mom, she's just guarded. Sloane lost her parents early. She's been on her own since she was young. I think you'll like her." I didn't want to disappoint him. I figured maybe she just needed love. I'd read somewhere that people who act tough are often the most afraid of being hurt. So I opened my heart and welcomed Sloane like the daughter I never had. 6 months later, they married in a small but elegant ceremony at St. Andrews. I covered half the wedding cost, the savings from nearly 20 years of extra shifts, because I wanted Nolan to have a beautiful start. I remember the moment he held his bride's hand, eyes bright like the world had just opened wide. I stood in the church hallway watching them walk out under falling petals, feeling both happy and empty. The only man I ever loved now lay under cold earth, and my only son was starting his own life. After the ceremony, Sloane said to me, "I don't have parents anymore. Could you think of me as your daughter?" I nodded, moved. "Of course, Sloane. Your family." She smiled, but in that smile was a fleeting chill. The early months after the wedding were peaceful. Every Sunday, they came for dinner with pastries or wine. They talked about work, plans, and sometimes Sloane would say softly, "I hope we have a baby soon so you won't be lonely." Those words softened me. I started to picture a grandchild running through the lavender, laughter filling the gaps between me and my solitude. Time passed and everything seemed perfect. Nolan advanced. Sloane was praised at work. I was proud of. them and kept my simple life. Until one December afternoon, Nolan showed up pale. I was prepping dinner when the door opened fast and he dropped into a chair, head in his hands. "What happened?" I asked, heart racing. He looked up, eyes red. "They cut staff, they're closing our branch. I lost my job, Mom." I stood still. My son, the one who promised he'd take care of me, was slumped in front of me like a lost boy. I put my hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, son. It's temporary. You're good at what you do." He shook his head. "I've got a car loan, apartment rent. Sloane's going to be so disappointed." I heard fear in his voice. Not fear of unemployment, fear of losing the image, Sloane admired. That night, I didn't sleep. I made coffee and watched the city lights. The worry for my son rose in me like a tide. As a mother, nothing hurts more than seeing your child despair. I thought of my night shifts, of staying awake to save strangers, and told myself, if I could save them, I can save my own son. The next day, Nolan said they'd move in for a few months to save on rent. I agreed immediately, without hesitation. Deep down, a small warning flickered, the kind you get after seeing too many tragedies in a hospital, but I pushed it away. I saw one thing: my son needed me. And like always, I was ready to do anything to help him get back up. I didn't know that in that moment, that harmless nod, I opened the door to a nightmare that would last more than a year, where I'd lose money, memories, and finally, myself. Back then, I believed that if a mother just loved enough, the family would hold together. I didn't know some children don't need more love, they just want full control of what's in their mother's hands. And that was the beginning of everything. "Just a few months, Mom. Once I find a new job, Sloane and I will move out." When Nolan said it, it sounded light as air, and I sleepless for nights. Worrying about him nodded right away. I had no idea that from that moment on, my two-story home, the one holding my life and my memories with Harold, would stop being home in the way it used to be. I remember the morning they moved in. Nolan brought a few suitcases. Sloane drove a white luxury car with the trunk full of pricey luggage, high heels, handbags, and boxes of makeup. She beamed, sweet as honey. "Thank you, Mom. It feels so peaceful here, like a little vacation." I smiled, trying to believe my daughter-in-law was truly grateful. I took them upstairs to the room that used to be mine and Harold's. It still smelled like oak and old sunlight. I meant to keep it, but Nolan put a hand on my shoulder. "This room is bigger. You should stay downstairs for convenience. Sloane and I need space for work, and it's easier for me to take care of you." It sounded so reasonable, I didn't argue. I packed up and moved to the small room on the first floor that used to be storage. That first night, Sloane cooked meatballs in tomato sauce, a recipe I learned from a friend's mom in Texas. She smiled brightly, wore a brand new apron, and told me to sit and relax. Watching her move around the kitchen warmed me. I imagined Harold smiling somewhere too. Dinner was lovely. We talked about Nolan applying to new companies, about starting over. I slept better than I had in months. But the peace didn't last. By the second week, I heard Sloane's complaints. "You buy this kind of toilet paper, Paula?" My skin reacts. Then, "The kitchen stuff is too old, let's replace everything." "Gas stoves aren't safe." She stopped calling me Mom and switched to Paula. Every time I heard it, I felt pushed out of my own family. I tried to stay polite, cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, even as I got weaker. One day, I found Sloane opening my bedroom without knocking. She gave a little laugh. "Oh, I just needed scissors. Don't worry, think of me like a daughter." I forced a smile, but it pinched. That was the only room left that felt like it was mine. One evening, while I was mending an old sweater, Nolan came in. He looked exhausted, dark circles heavy under his eyes. "Mom," he hesitated, "I know you keep your pension in your account. If you let me manage it for now, you won't have to worry about bills, property tax, insurance. I can help you keep things organized so you can relax." I looked at my son, the one who cried in my arms at his father's funeral, and my heart softened. "Are you sure, Nolan?" "I don't want to be a burden." He smiled and held my hand. "Do you trust me?" "I just want you to rest. Let me be useful." So I agreed. The next morning I handed him my bank card and quietly told him the PIN. I didn't realize I was handing over the last key to my freedom. The first week went fine. Bills were paid, the fridge was full, and Nolan gave me $100. "I know you like flowers. Go to the market, you need a little joy." I smiled. Maybe I'd worried too much. But by the third week, I couldn't access my bank account. When I asked, Nolan answered gently, "I changed the password, Mom. The bank requires two-factor now. I'll manage it. You don't need to worry." I hesitated, then nodded. I always thought trusting my son was the right thing. Meals started changing, no more roast or beef stew smells. Instead, instant noodles, crackers, and quick bites. Sloan said, "Too much fat isn't good for older folks. You should simplify your portions." I gave a thin smile, even as my stomach growled every night. One morning, I went to the market to buy fruit. When I swiped my card, the machine said insufficient funds. I froze. In my whole working life, I'd never heard those words. At home, I asked Nolan. He spoke quickly. "I pulled some out to pay off a credit card. Don't worry, I'll put it back soon." I stayed quiet. I didn't want to turn dinner into a fight. Meanwhile, Sloan started showing up with new things. Designer handbags, fresh dresses, red-soled heels I'd only seen in magazines. She said, "A friend gifted them. She works at an outlet." I knew outlets don't hand out gifts like that, but I said nothing. I kept thinking if I stayed quiet, things would get better. Nolan changed too. He dressed sharper, said he had interviews. When I asked where, he spoke vaguely. At night, I sat in my small room listening to their laughter upstairs, the pop of a wine cork, the TV. I told myself, my son is still happy. That's enough. Food kept shrinking, fruit disappeared, milk became rare. I got used to one small meal or splitting a packet of noodles to last the day. My body weakened, but I didn't speak up. I feared loneliness more than hunger. I was afraid if I complained, they'd leave and the house would be as empty as those first years after Harold died. Sometimes friends called to check in. I always said, "I'm fine, my son moved back in. It's wonderful." I heard my own voice shake, like I was telling someone else's story. One afternoon, I noticed the brass lamp Harold bought in 1985 was gone. When I asked, Sloan said casually, "I sold it. Old wiring, no one uses it. Got over $100 for it." I stayed silent. A few days later, the oak table was gone. Then the sofa set. Then our wedding frame. I looked around and saw only my fingernail marks left on the wall where that photo used to hang. That night, while they went out to dinner with friends, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty room. The yellow bulb spilled over, peeling paint, and in the fridge door's reflection I saw a thin old woman with frizzy hair, wearing a sweater with a worn neckline. I tried to remember the last time I heard myself laugh, maybe the first night they moved in. I sat there a long time. Then I opened the drawer and took out a small brown notebook where I began recording every detail: the date, the time, the amount of money, the item that disappeared. An old nurse's habit: write everything down in case you need to check later. I didn't think of it as evidence, just thought that if I started to forget someday, I'd still know what had happened. But the more I wrote, the more I realized the empty space in my life was widening, like a cut silently spreading. Every page was one lost item, one more piece of control taken, and one part of my dignity erased. That night, I wrote one line in red ink. June 12th, lost the wedding photo frame. Don't know if they sold it, But for sure I lost more than that. And I understood. Maybe everything really had started slipping out of my hands. I don't remember the exact day I began to suspect, only that one morning, when the sun just touched the window frame, I decided to withdraw a little cash to buy fruit and flowers for Harold's altar. It had been a long time I'd been living on whatever portions they gave me. I put on my old coat, went to the ATM near the supermarket, slid in my card, and entered the PIN. The screen lit up, then stopped at $37. I thought I read it wrong. I pulled out the card, wiped my glasses, and tried again. Same thing. $37 when I get a $7,000 pension each month, deposited automatically on the 10th. It was only the 16th. I stood frozen at the machine, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the keypad. Someone behind me urged me to hurry, so I bowed my head, pulled the card, and staggered outside. The midday sun was glaring, but I felt as cold as if I'd just walked out of a morgue. When I got home, Nolan was watching TV, feet up on the table, headphones on. I set my bag down and asked straight out, "Nolan, I just checked my account. There's $37 left. Explain." He didn't look at my dazeft. Plammy just pulled out an earbud and shrugged. "I pulled some out for a bit, Mom. Had to cover some debts. You wouldn't get it. Times are tough." I tried to stay calm. "How much did you take?" He turned, eyes sharpening. "Can you stop nitpicking? You live in this house and don't lack anything, and you still nag. You're selfish." I was speechless. Selfish. That word felt like a knife to the chest. Me, the one who raised him with calloused hands, who pulled triple shifts so he could pay tuition, now called selfish by my own son. The next day was my close friend Maggie's birthday, a former coworker from the hospital. For 30 years, we'd always exchanged small gifts, a bouquet, a book. I said, "Nolan, I want to take out a little money to buy Maggie a gift, just $20. He was holding his phone, didn't bother to look up. "No, I'm cycling that money." "You don't need to give gifts anymore. It's enough that they know you're broke." I went quiet. Not because I was broke, but because I knew there was nothing left to say. My meals shrank to the point of ridiculous. Half a packet of instant noodles split into 2 meals, a little boiled greens, sometimes a leftover cracker. I ate slowly, stretching each bite so I wouldn't feel like I was being starved. Once, I asked, "Sloan, why is there no fruit, milk, or meat lately?" She gave a small smile without looking up from her phone. "At your age, eating less is healthier. Too much protein tires the heart. I'm just thinking about you." I knew that was an excuse. Every night they ordered takeout pizza, lobster, pasta. I sat in my room and smelled the grease drift down the hallway, my stomach growling, my heart pounding. Once, I heard Sloan laugh loudly. "Good thing she doesn't eat much. If she ate like us, we'd never have enough money." They both laughed. I lay still in the dark, tears soaking the pillow, not sure if it was from hunger or humiliation. My weight plummeted, 35 pounds lost in under half a year. I got dizzy whenever I stood up. I ran out of blood pressure meds and asked Nolan, "Can you buy my prescription for me? The old script is in the drawer." He said, "It's expensive. I'll order it online when there's a sale." 3 weeks passed, no meds. I started having trouble breathing. In the mornings my heart raced, but I still tried to smile whenever they walked by. I didn't want them to see I was weak. Weak people get discarded. One afternoon, Maggie came to visit. She brought apple pie, my favorite. When she stepped in, I was so happy I almost cried. But before I could say anything, Sloan came down the stairs, a pasted-on smile. "Hi there, she's really tired. Please let her rest. She can't eat sweets." Maggie looked at me with worried eyes, but I only managed a small nod, pretending to agree. Sloan took the bag with the pie, gave one more smile, then saw my friend out. When the door closed, I heard the paper bag hit the trash can. That night I sat in my room, the light so dim my shadow stretched long across the wall. I realized they were isolating me on purpose. No one could see me. No one knew what was happening in this house. I was no longer the homeowner, no longer a mother, just a faint shape living on the pity of the very people draining me. I started keeping a journal. Each page had 3 columns. Date, meal, amount. I logged it carefully like the old days as a nurse, tracking vitals and meds. April 14th. Ate half a packet of noodles. $0. April 15th. 8 crackers, water. $0. April 16th. Nolan withdrew more money, said property taxes. No documentation. My journal thickened day by day, like a treatment chart for a patient being treated with cruelty. I didn't know why I was writing, maybe to remember, maybe to prove I existed and how I was treated. Then one sleepless night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlight's yellow glow slip through the curtain. In my head, I heard Harold, what he told me before he died. "Paula, don't let anyone turn your kindness into a weapon." My hands shaking, I opened the drawer and took out the backup phone I'd hidden since the day Nolan moved in. I turned on the recorder. From that day, I started recording every conversation in the house. When Nolan told Sloan, "She's old, she won't remember anything." When Sloan said, "Let her eat less, we'll save a ton." When they talked about accounts, about selling a few antique pieces. I kept the phone in my coat pocket, pretending to tidy up, or sat and read. Their voices slipped into the mic, clear enough to chill me. Some nights I played it back, my chest aching like it was being squeezed. I didn't recognize my son's voice anymore. He used to say, "I love you more than anything." Now it was flat, calculating, indifferent. I began to change. No arguing, no asking, no crying. I just observed, wrote, and moved like a ghost in my own house. In the mornings, I still greeted them with a smile. At night, when they slept, I quietly checked old email statements I still had access to. The numbers drained away like water through fingers. More than $90,000 gone. I didn't know where it went, only saw charges for boutique, design project, renovation. I understood. This wasn't about Nolan struggling anymore. This was a deliberate plan. By month 13, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize myself. Wrinkled face, gray hair, sunken eyes, sallow skin. The woman in the mirror looked like a patient I'd once cared for, except I had no one caring for me. That night, I added to the journal. Month 13, $37 left. No one knows. No one asks. I'm not afraid anymore. I just want to live long enough to watch them fall. And I swore, with whatever strength I won, he had left, that I would not let Harold be ashamed of his wife. I would live. I would remember. And when the time came, I would make them pay for every packet of noodles I swallowed with tears. I don't know how Grant figured it out. Maybe the calls I kept dodging, the "I'm fine," I said too quickly, or just a brother's instinct built from growing up together. Either way, that morning when the door swung open, I saw Grant standing there in the doorway, eyes horrified as if he'd walked into something unbelievable. He didn't speak. He just stood there. Morning light poured across the threshold, lighting the room where my wedding photo with Harold used to hang, now just a bare wall pocked with nail marks. No chairs, no table, no sign of life. He walked in slowly, shoes tapping the cold wooden floor. I lay on a bare mattress, wrapped in a thin towel, shivering because the wind had slipped through the window gap the night before. Grant's eyes stopped on my gaunt body. Then he turned away, like he didn't want me to see his tears. "Paula," his voice broke, "you're living like this?" I tried to say I'm fine, but my throat locked. I wasn't fine, and we both knew it. Grant went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. 1 bottle of water, an empty butter tub, half an onion. He opened a cabinet, then turned to me, voice low and sharp as a knife. "You get a $7,000 pension each month, right?" I nodded. "Then where's the money?" Before I could answer, Nolan came downstairs, shirt unbuttoned, hair messy, face annoyed from being woken early. "What's going on?" Grant turned to face his nephew head on. "You want to know what's going on? I want to know why my sister is living like a homeless person in her own house." Nolan smirked, arms crossed. "Mom gives me all her pension. I just use it to invest so the whole family benefits. And those old things we sold them to clear space." He said it as calmly as well, if he were talking about the weather. Grant was quiet for a few seconds. Then he slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, and set it on the empty table. His eyes were calm, but underneath was a banked fury waiting to blow. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "You just confessed, Nolan. And before we go any further, let me remind you everything you say is being remembered. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom, it comes from someone who stands up and says, 'Enough.'" Did your chest tighten when Grant said that? Write your thoughts about that moment. I want to know if you felt the power of calm the way I did. Sloane came down the stairs in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand. She looked around, annoyed. "What's with all the noise? We have guests." Grant turned a cold smile. "Oh, you must be Sloane. Good, this is convenient. I'm Grant Whitaker, Paula's brother. I'm here to take my sister's life back." I gave Grant a small nod. It was time. In my hand was the backup phone I'd hidden for over a year, holding all the recordings, photos of the things sold, and copies of bank statements. I set it on the table, light as placing a bomb. Grant looked at me, his eyes softening. "You did well." Nolan forced a laugh. "Mom recorded what?" "Come on, Mom. You're old. You think you're a detective?" Grant answered for me, his voice oddly calm. "No, but the police might be interested now." The air in the house thickened. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Grant pulled out his phone and dialed. "Arthur, I need you here now. Sloane and Nolan are both here. And bring a doctor, my sister's depleted." 20 minutes later, attorney Arthur Hale Harold's old friend and Dr. Camila Ortiz arrived. Arthur wore a gray suit, steady as ever. Camila had a stethoscope and quick professional eyes. Arthur looked around and sighed. "I never thought I'd be back here, like this." He turned to Nolan and Sloane. "We need all of Mrs. Whitaker's bank statements and transfer records for the past 12 months. Right now." Nolan reacted like he'd been struck. "I'm not obligated to," Grant cut in, voice low and firm. "Yes, you are. This is my mother's property. She's in a state of malnutrition and financial exploitation. If you don't cooperate, I'm calling the police." Sloane tried to look composed, but her lips trembled. "You're slandering us. Paula gave money to her son. That's not a crime." Arthur set his briefcase on the table, opened it sheet by sheet. "True, but exploiting an elder's assets through coercion and financial control is a federal offense, and I believe we have enough evidence here. Doctor." Camila knelt beside me, took my blood pressure, and asked quietly, "How have you been eating?" I gave a small smile. "Half a packet of noodles a day." She shook her head, jotted notes, then said softly to Arthur, "Stage 2 malnutrition. She needs to be admitted soon." Nolan started to unravel. "You don't understand. I was just trying to help my mom. I'll print the statements later." Grant stepped forward, facing my son head on. "No. Right now." Sloane set the cup down and stepped in front of her husband, voice rising. "You don't get to order people around in this house." Grant answered crisply, "This house is in Paula's name. And right now, she's been stripped of control by you two. I have every right to protect her." Arthur plugged the USB I'd handed him into his laptop. The screen filled with audio files, photos, and old statements. In one recording, Sloane's voice was crystal clear. Let her eat less. She's old, eating more is just a waste of money. Then Nolan's voice. Selling the stuff in the house is fine. She doesn't use it. The room went silent. Sloane went pale. Nolan lowered his head, lips pressed tight. Arthur stopped the audio and looked up, his voice calm, but cold. I'll give you a chance to cooperate. Provide all bank statements, investment details, and a list of items sold. If not, I'll forward this file to the Kansas City Police today. I looked at my son, the one who cried in my arms at his father's funeral, now just a stranger shrinking in a chair. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just a hollow ache. Sloane tried to salvage it. We just wanted to invest in a store. It was going to help the whole family. Arthur said nothing, just held up a sheet. These are purchase orders and credit card receipts in your name, drawn from Mrs. Whitaker's account. I count more than $90,000. You still want to call that investment? No one answered. Grant hit record on his phone. From now on, everything you say will be saved. I pulled out a small paper. I'd prepared the backup password to my old statement email. I set it on the table. Here, I said, voice hoarse but clear. If they delete anything, there's still a copy. I'm not as foolish as they think. Grant gave a small smile, not happy but relieved. He turned to me. You did great, Paula. Now they know the helpless prey still has teeth. The room's energy shifted. Nolan and Sloane were no longer in control. Their eyes darted like cornered animals. Arthur gathered the files and said briefly, "The police will be in touch soon. First, Mrs. Whitaker needs to be taken to the hospital. I'll arrange it now." When they left, I looked around the empty room. Same four walls, but for the first time in 13 months, I felt my own breath return. I turned to Grant. He took my hand and squeezed. "Sis," he said, "you're not alone anymore." I nodded, eyes stinging. Outside, the Kansas sky was gray and the wind cut cold, but in my chest a light flickered back on. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I just felt calm, because I knew the nightmare had finally started to be stopped. Arthur had just collected the debt acknowledgement when he paused, eyes landing on a stack of papers Nolan had left half-tucked in a folder. "Let me see that." Nolan flinched. "That's just some broker flyers." Arthur opened it and flipped quickly through. Then he stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. "No, not flyers. This is a preliminary brokerage agreement from Greenfield Realty proposing to sell this house for $239,500. Plan to list officially in 3 weeks." The air around me felt heavy. A chill ran down my spine. "Sell the house?" I blurted, almost in disbelief. "But this is my house. I never signed anything." Arthur nodded slightly, his voice metallic. "I know, and that's the problem." He pulled a few more sheets from the folder photocopies with a faint blue stamp. "The signature here says Paula Whitaker," he pointed out the strokes, "but it's nothing like your real signature. This is forgery. They weren't just taking your accounts, they planned to sell your property." Grant slammed his hand on the table, making Sloane's coffee cup shatter on the floor. "God! My sister was about to be thrown out on the street?" His voice shook with fury, somehow still cold and controlled. Nolan shot up. "It's not like that. I just wanted to sell and buy a smaller place. It'd be easier. She doesn't need a big house." Grant spun around, eyes blazing. "What did you just say? She doesn't need? Listen to yourself. You call that love?" Arthur cut in, voice low and sharp as a blade. "You've just admitted to attempting to sell an elder's property without legal authorization. In Missouri, that falls under elder financial abuse, and combined with forged signatures, this is forgery, a criminal offense." Nolan went pale. He looked to Sloane for help, but she had her head down, hands shaking. Arthur closed the folder and slid it back toward them. Before I hand all of this to the Kansas prosecutors, I'm giving you one last chance." He looked straight at Nolan. "You will sign a written admission of what you did. Agree to a repayment plan of $1,400 a month for 54 months, and leave this house within 2 hours. If not, this goes to the district attorney today." The room fell into a deadly silence. I heard wind whistling through the window seam, the clock ticking, and my own heart pounding. Nolan trembled, trying to take Sloane's hand, but she pulled away. "I'm your family," he cried, voice cracking with desperation. Grant, who had stood still till then, turned slowly. His voice was deep and resonant, each word etched into the tile. "Family doesn't starve each other. Family doesn't take the last dollar from the woman who gave them life to buy handbags and designer dresses." Nolan hung his head. For the first time I saw him cry, not from deep remorse, but because he knew he'd lost it all. His reputation, his money, and his mother's trust. Sloane wiped her tears. We just wanted a chance. We thought we could restart. I didn't think it would get this bad." Arthur answered evenly. "A chance is not stealing someone else's future, Mrs. Paula gave you a chance the day you stepped into this house and you tore it up yourself." I looked at them, feeling hollow. Memories flooded in. The warm wedding, Nolan's smile at graduation, the morning I baked bread the first time Sloane called me Mom. Now it was all dust. I spoke, quiet but clear. "Your chance was built on my instant noodles, on nights I curled up listening to you laugh upstairs. If that's love, then I pray no one ever loves me like that again." Nolan broke down crying, fell to his knees, but Grant didn't budge. He pulled out a chair, set the paper on the table, and pushed a pen toward them. "Right, now." Nolan's hand shook as he picked up the pen. Sloane bit her lip, tears falling onto the page and blurring the ink. Arthur checked his watch. "You have exactly 2 hours to pack up. After that, the police will arrive. I don't want to see either of you within 10 miles of Mrs. Paula's house." No one answered. Grant turned to Arthur, speaking low. "Make sure they don't have time to delete data or pull more money." Arthur nodded. "I've already sent a temporary freeze request. All accounts connected to Sloane Boutique and Nolan Jenkins will be locked within 24 hours. Dr. Camila stood by, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You need to go to the hospital now. I don't want your blood pressure over 160 for another minute." I nodded and slowly stood. My legs trembled, but they were steadier than ever before. "Grant helped me into my coat," he murmured. "You finished the hardest part. Now it's time to take back what's yours." I looked around the room one more time, bare. Walls, cold wood floors, a place that once held laughter now echoing with the sound of justice. Arthur gathered the files and sealed all the evidence. Statements, brokerage papers, forged POA, the audio files. He labeled it Evidence, Case Hash 27104. The rip of the tape sounded like sealing an old era, the era of trust betrayed. Sloane sank into a chair, face in her hands. Nolan stood frozen, as if all the strength had been drained from him. I said nothing more. Not because I had no words, but because my silence was the heaviest sentence I could deliver. Grant opened the door. Noon sunlight spilled in, golden across the floor. I turned back one last time, then stepped out. "Behind me," Arthur said firmly. "From now on, everything goes by the law." My steps were slow but no longer shaky. Each one sloughed off a bit of weight. I was no longer the woman forced to live in the dark, surviving on instant noodles. I was Paula Whitaker, who had passed through hunger and humiliation, and still stood up in the light. Grant's car was waiting at the curb. As I sat down, Dr. Camila wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my wrist one last time. "Still high, but more stable. Probably the adrenaline," she said, then smiled. "Or because you just won the first round." I looked out the window. Inside the house, Two silhouettes were packing bags, faces drained. I felt no joy, no vindictive thrill, just the sense that it was time to end it. Grant started the engine and glanced over. "Let's go, hospital first, then my place. That house is getting locked up." I nodded. The car rolled forward, leaving behind the pale yellow house that had once been a home and then became a crime scene. And in the soft Kansas sunlight that day, I felt one thing clearly. You don't need to shout to win. You just need to stand up straight and stop being afraid. The nightmare was over, and justice, late as it was opening the door. I was admitted to the hospital that same afternoon. The internal medicine doors swung open, and the familiar smell of antiseptic rushed in, the scent I'd lived with for over 40 years as a nurse, but now it made me feel strangely small. They put me in a bed, started an IV, checked my blood pressure, drew blood repeatedly. The drip ticked like a clock, slow and steady. I heard Dr. Camila tell the floor nurse, "BP 90/60, severe anemia, elevated BUN, she's on the edge of multi-organ failure. A few more weeks and we wouldn't have made it." I lay still, eyes on the white ceiling. Never in my life did I think I'd hear those words about me. Grant sat beside me, hands clasped tight. He didn't speak, just stood to straighten my blanket now and then, or patted my hand. Whenever I dreamed I was lost in an empty house with no exit, he squeezed my hand harder, pulling me back to the present. On day 3, I fully woke from a fever. Grant was still there, reading a novel he'd brought. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the corner of the table. He looked up when I opened my eyes. "Did you sleep?" I nodded slightly. My voice was weak, but my heart was lighter. It's the first time I slept without hearing them argue. Arthur visited on day 5. Same gray suit, briefcase full of papers. "Good news, Paula," he said as he pulled up a chair. "The court voided the forged POA and the bank approved the freeze. We're restoring the accounts." He opened a tablet and showed me a summary. "We can likely recover about $18,000 to $25,000 from remaining balances and liquidated assets from Sloan Boutique. The rest was basically burned up by the store." I didn't feel regret. I asked softly, "What about the insurance?" Arthur nodded. "We're reversing the beneficiary change. I've filed the formal request, and Nolan no longer has access to the records." Grant put a hand on my shoulder. "See, the tide's turning." I smiled faintly. Harold is probably exhaling somewhere. On day 6, Dr. Camila reviewed my labs. She shook her head, but this time with hope. "Numbers are improving, but Paula, you need at least 6 months of nutritional rehab. Your body's been depleted for a long time. I'll set a special diet and recommend therapy as well." I smiled lightly. "Doctor, I used to teach med students that emotional wounds take longer to heal than physical ones. I guess it's my turn to learn that lesson again." Grant laughed, trying to sound upbeat. "If you're philosophizing, you're doing okay." That afternoon, Arthur returned with another stack of papers. "Paula, I need your authorization to sell the Kansas house. Once everything is finalized, the funds will go into a private account with Grant temporarily supervising." I looked out the window, late sun filtering through the sheer curtain, lighting the small scar on my wrist, a relic from night shifts long ago. I nodded. "Sell it. I don't want to go back there. That house died with my trust." Grant hesitated. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I'll stay with you in Denver for a while. I need to learn how to live again before I think about being independent." He just nodded. No objections. Maybe because he knew that, for the first time in years, I was speaking with my own will. That evening, a nurse brought in an envelope. "Someone left this at the front desk." "It's from Nolan Jenkins." I stared at the yellow envelope, the familiar handwriting. Grant moved to open it, but I raised a hand. "No. Leave it." "You don't want to know?" "I already know, Grant. That letter could be an apology, an excuse, or a plea, but every word is too late. I set the envelope aside and turned away. From that moment, I decided to revoke Nolan's visitation. I didn't want to see my son, not to punish him, but to protect the small peace I'd just reclaimed. On day 8, the doctor let me sit up and start walking around the room. Grant supported me step by step, as gently as a brother helping his little sister learn to walk. When I got tired, he brewed herbal tea and read me cheerful bits of news from Denver. A new community garden, a free seniors yoga class, and the corner he planned to set up for me, morning light just right for miniature rose pots. I teared up not for the flowers, but because for the first time someone spoke about my future home without strings attached. On day 9, when the last IV line came out, I felt like my body had been freed. Grant sat across from me, smiling. "Tomorrow you're discharged. Denver, here we come." I pressed my lips together and nodded. "But before we go, I want to do one thing." I took the small notebook from the drawer, the journal where I'd tracked every day, meal, and dollar for 13 months. I opened to the last page and wrote, "Day 274. Oatmeal for breakfast, not instant noodles. $0. But the feeling priceless." Grant smiled at me, and I broke down, truly cried, not from pain, but from release. I cried for the cold noodle dinners, the dry crackers that stuck in my throat, the fear that clenched me whenever I heard their footsteps in the hall. All of it was receding, like a shadow shrinking from the last bulb at the end of a tunnel. Dr. Camila came in as I wiped my tears and smiled softly. "Let it out, Paula. That's a good sign. If you can still cry, your heart still knows how to live." I squeezed her hand. "Doctor, you didn't just save my life. You helped me believe life can start over at 70. That night, after everyone left, I turned on the bedside lamp and wrote my new life plan. Health. Walk 20 minutes every morning. Eat 3 real meals. Finances. Open a private account. Share details only with Grant and Arthur. Legal safety. Draft a new will. Define beneficiaries clearly. And authorize the attorney to monitor any changes." I underlined the last line. No one gets to define my worth except me. When I finished, I looked out the window. Kansas streetlights still glowed, painting the sky a soft orange. Inside me, a new light was forming, small but steady. The next morning, Grant arrived early. He carefully packed my things and led me out. Before getting into the car, I glanced back at the hospital, a place I once thought I might never leave. I whispered to myself, "This time, I'm not just leaving a hospital, I'm leaving the weaker version of me." As the car turned off the main road, I closed my eyes. I pictured a simple dinner in Denver, a small table, a plate of steamed vegetables, toast, and warm golden light. No shouting, no contempt, just peace. Thinking of that, I laughed through tears. I thought I'd lost everything, but now I knew I'd found the most important thing, the light at the end of the tunnel. I returned to the Kansas house. In mid-June, not to live, but to say goodbye. Grant had hired cleaners, painters, and a small furniture company to refresh the place before the sale. They worked hard, walls painted a creamy white, new window panes, polished wood floors. The house looked almost reborn. But crossing the threshold, I still felt a cold in my chest that no coat of paint could soften. Everything was tidy, but to me, it wasn't a home anymore. The air still held familiar traces, dish soap, oak, and a faint lavender I used to love. Now the scent tightened my throat. Each room echoed with the sounds of my old steps at night, the hollow fridge door, the clink of a spoon against a bowl of cold noodles. Grant said, "You don't have to go in. I'll handle everything." I shook my head. "No. If I don't close this door myself, it'll stay open in my mind." I walked through each room. The living room had a pale beige sofa now. The walls were clean, the lights were bright, but I could still see last years' shadow of me there. biting my lip to keep from crying when I heard Nolan arguing. The kitchen shone, the table gleamed, but I remembered every old knife mark where I sliced bread and where they laid out bills I never understood. Arthur arrived while I stood in the backyard. He carried his briefcase, that familiar, calm face. "Paula," he said, "everything is finalized. I've set up a trust to manage the sale proceeds and the monthly repayments from Nolan and Sloan. It will all transfer to you on schedule. No one can interfere." I nodded and thanked him. Grant stood quietly beside me, eyes following my movements. He understood. I wasn't just handing over a house, I was handing over a part of my life. I took exactly 3 things: an old photo frame of Harold, the man who told me, "Don't let anyone use family ties to push you out of your own home," a small box of Nolan's childhood keepsakes, his first roller coaster ticket, a green marble, and a note he once wrote, "I'll take care of you when you're old." And finally, a stack of thank you letters from patients I helped over 42 years, wobbly handwriting, short, but sincere. Those were the memories I chose to keep, the only ones that didn't hurt. When the door shut behind me, I stood on the stoop as a light breeze brushed my hair. A strange feeling slipped in, part sadness, part relief. Grant locked the door and handed the key to Arthur. "That's it," he said. I answered softly, "No, this is the beginning." 3 months later, I was living in Denver. The city had honey-gold mornings, dry, clear air, and the smell of coffee on every corner. The little place Grant set up for me sat by a park lined with old elms. My room faced the garden. Every morning I opened the window to sparrows and air with no trace of debt. The Kansas house sold for $230,000, below market a bit, but enough to close the past. After an internal review, the bank refunded $22,000 from fraudulent transactions. Arthur sent monthly reports. Everything was transparent. As for Nolan and Sloan, they made the first 3 payments exactly on time, $1,400 each, full amount, no notes, no contact, and I didn't need anything more. I opened a new account at a different bank with 2-factor authentication. Every login required a code to my phone, the phone I bought myself, in my name, shared with no one. I called it a small symbol of freedom. Arthur helped update my will, everything clear. Grant as financial guardian if I lose capacity. The remainder to a support fund for retired nurses named the Harold and Paula Whitaker Fund. Every morning, I woke at 6 a.m., brewed mint tea, and looked out at the park. I walked around the small lake, met older neighbors, and exchanged gentle smiles. No one knew what I'd been through, and I didn't need them to. I just wanted to breathe, walk, and feel my heart grow, calm again. I relearned to cook the foods I love, not for anyone else, but for me. On day 1, I made chicken vegetable soup with toasted bread. When the scent filled the small kitchen, I burst into tears, not from sadness, but from the feeling of caring for myself. That meal was my first lesson in self-care, something I'd forgotten for 70 years. Grant liked to joke, "You're becoming a new Mrs. Paula." I smiled. "No, I'm just becoming who I used to be, the woman I lost in that family storm." At night before bed, I opened the little notebook now with new pages. I no longer tracked meal amount, but joy reason. September 1st, Joy walked with a neighbor named June. She told me about her flowers. September 2nd, Joy made tomato soup, and it wasn't too salty. September 3rd, Joy slept a full 7 hours, no dreams. I never thought slept 7 hours would make me proud. For 13 months of fear, I never slept deeply always. Half awake, flinching, afraid of doors opening, of strange footsteps. Now I could lie still, breathe in the clean pillowcase, hear the wind tap the window, and smile. One day Grant asked, "Do you ever miss Kansas?" I answered, "No, I only miss who I used to be there, not the place." He nodded and said nothing more. He understood. I kept Harold's photo on my desk. Each night I lit a small candle and told him about the day, not to memorialize, but to remind myself that people have truly loved me. Fall came early to Denver. Yellow leaves covered the porch. The wind carried the scent of coffee and apple pie from the shop across the street. I wrapped myself in the scarf Grant gave me, sat by the window, and watched the sun go down. In that moment, I realized I was living, not just surviving. No more shouting, no more contempt, no more fear of an empty fridge. Just me, a 70-year-old woman learning to love herself again, step by step. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Life, even broken, can keep going. I don't know how many years are ahead, but I know that from now on, not a single day will be taken by anyone or by fear. And when night fell, I whispered like a prayer, "Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Harold. And thank you, wounds. You taught me to stand up." Then I turned off the light. No more IV lines, no more darkness of hunger or guilt, just the first peaceful 7-hour sleep of my new life. I began therapy in early fall on Dr. Camila's advice. She said, "Your body's okay now, Paula. It's your soul's turn." The counseling center was in an old building with pale green walls and windows facing a small park. That first morning, I was a little shaky. I'd always thought therapy was for people who were weak or couldn't control their emotions. But when I met the therapist, Marissa, those thoughts faded. Marissa was around 50, voice light as a breeze, kind eyes that missed nothing. She let me tell the outline of what I happened without interrupting, set a cup of herbal tea in front of me, then said something I'll never forget. "What you went through has a name, Paula. It's called financial abuse and coercive control." I went still, she continued, slowly, as if afraid I might not take it in. Financial abuse doesn't need physical force. It's when someone takes control of money, decides spending, or uses finances to make another person dependent. It's a form of abuse, and it leaves invisible wounds. I looked at my hands, these fingers that had cared for hundreds of patients now shaking because of a truth so simple it took me a year to hear. "So, I'm a victim?" Marissa nodded gently. "Yes. But more importantly, you're not in that role anymore." The first session ended with what seemed simple homework. "Write a letter to yourself at 70, Marissa said. "Write as if you're your own friend. Don't worry about grammar, just be honest." That night, at the small desk in my Denver room, I opened my old brown notebook, the one that had recorded hungry days and then small joys. I wrote, "Dear Paula, you are not at fault. You are not weak, not foolish, not to blame. You simply loved the wrong way, trusted the wrong person. That does not erase your worth. People can steal your money, but they can't take your dignity unless you let them. You're still alive, still able to smile, and that's already a win." When I closed the notebook, my hands had stopped shaking. Something rose inside me, self-forgiveness. Marissa encouraged me to rejoin community, to talk, to listen. I signed up for the church book club, where older women met every Wednesday to read and discuss. The first time, I sat in the corner, listening to laughter and the way they argued about characters. Slowly, I began to speak up. One day, when the group read The Color Purple, I shared a bit of my story. The room went quiet for a few seconds, then a silver-haired woman beside me said softly, "I was like you once. My husband kept all our bank cards for 20 years. I didn't think it was abuse until I read this book." We looked at each other. No more words were needed. Just understanding the kind you only recognize in someone who's lived it. From then on, I shared more. I talked about keeping a private account, locking cards, turning on two-factor authentication, reading monthly statements, and not hesitating to ask when something looks wrong. Marissa said, "Sharing experience is a powerful way to heal. When you help someone else out of the dark, that light also shines back on you." I didn't expect that from those small conversations. An idea would slowly take shape. I asked Grant and the church to help set up a small fund for victims of financial abuse, for older women who have no one left beside them. The fund would simply cover temporary housing, legal consultations, and classes to relearn personal money management. I called it Second Light. Because I know not everyone gets the chance to relight their life. My health steadily improved. I ate well, slept deeply, gained back about 22 pounds, my skin started to look healthy, and the hair loss stopped. Dr. Camila called for a check-in. When she heard me talk about Denver, she laughed. "You're getting younger, Paula. Keep this up, and I'll be jealous." I answered. "No, I'm just finally living at my real age, not the age of fear." Grant noticed too. One evening, when I burst out laughing at a comedy show, he looked over at me, half joking, half serious. "You're back." I've been waiting to hear that laugh for 2 years. I laughed even harder, tears in my eyes but still smiling. "And you're still the first one to hear it." Now I can think of Nolan without struggling to breathe. The thought of him still pricks my heart, but it doesn't squeeze it anymore. I've learned this. Forgiveness isn't acceptance, it's taking the weight off your own shoulders. I still haven't read his letter, the yellow envelope lying in my desk drawer. Some nights I look at it for a long time, then set it down. Marissa said, "When you're ready, you'll know. Don't force yourself to reopen a wound that's just begun to close." I listened. I left it there as a reminder that we don't have to finish every story to move forward. In November, I was invited to speak at a small church workshop on preventing financial abuse. I stepped up to the lectern, hands a little shaky, but my voice steady. I used to think abuse only meant violence, but now I understand that sometimes abuse wears the face of love, of someone saying, "Mom, let me handle it," while quietly taking away your right to live. In the audience, a few women nodded, some wiped their tears. I continued, "Financial abuse starts with small things. When they say, 'Give me the card,' it's easier if I manage it. When they forbid you from checking statements because you wouldn't understand. When you ask to buy something and they say, 'What do you need money for?' All of those, added together, are how someone strips away your control." I ended with a smile. But I'm still here. I lost almost everything, and I got myself back. If I can do it at 70, anyone can. As I stepped down, a silver-haired woman took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You just named a pain I was afraid to name for 10 years. I simply squeezed her hand in return. No more words were needed. That night, back home, I sat in front of Harold's photo. A small candle flickered, its light trembling across the wall. I whispered, "Do you see, love? I know how to name my wound now, and I know how to heal it." Then I smiled. Not the forced smile of survival, but a true smile, the smile of someone who has taken back her life. A year passed since I left Kansas. The first winter in Denver was cold, but gentle, the kind of clear cold that makes you want to brew tea and sit quietly listening to the snow outside the window. I kept my old habit, recording each expense and each small joy, as if that notebook were proof I was still living, still in control of my life. That morning, Arthur called. His voice was as calm as always, but I could hear warmth in it. "Paula, I have an update. It's been 12 months since the repayment plan began. As of today, Nolan has paid $16,800, 12 installments, each $1,400. I was silent for a few seconds, looking out the window. A thin layer of snow covered the yard. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or hollow. Finally, I asked quietly, "How much is left?" Arthur flipped through papers. I heard the rustle over the phone. "About $59,000. Under the agreement, if they miss more than 2 consecutive installments, I'll refer the case to the district attorney and trigger criminal charges. I'm holding all the evidence, so you don't need to worry." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, Arthur. I just want everything to follow the process, no more, no less." He hesitated, then continued. "One more thing. Nolan wants to send you a letter, along with notes from his therapist. I've reviewed it, nothing harmful, so I'm forwarding it for you to decide." I thanked him and asked him to mail it. When I hung up, my heart beat strangely fast. I thought I had no feelings left about that name, and still, something twinged. 3 days later, the brown envelope lay on the table. I left it there all morning. Only that evening, after a prayer service at church, did I pick it up. In a quiet room, candlelight shimmering on Harold's frame, I opened the letter with hands that no longer trembled. Nolan's voice appeared on the page, slow, halting, but honest. "Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm only asking you to read this. I've been seeing a therapist for 6 months. She helped me see I didn't just steal your money. I stole your trust, your peace, and the image of the mother I once loved most. I wasn't starving. I was afraid of failing, afraid of seeing my wife disappointed. When Sloan said, 'Investing will change our lives,' I saw the easy path, and I chose the easy and cruel path. Now I know there's nothing easy about carrying guilt. I'm working at a small construction company, 35 hours a week. Every time I send a payment, I feel a little lighter, but it also hurts because I miss you. I don't dare call. I just want you to know, I'm still trying to fix myself." I set the letter down and took a deep breath. No tears, no anger. Just a quiet feeling, as if a storm had passed, leaving a beach strewn with debris, but the wind had stopped. I reread the last paragraph several times. Not because I wanted to believe it, but because I realized this. I could read my son's letter and my hands did not shake. Arthur was right. When you regain control, the numbers speak for themselves. $16,800, each dollar proof that justice isn't an abstract idea, but a repeated action, on schedule, without emotion, without bargaining. I didn't reply right away. The next day, as light snow fell, I sat down and wrote a short letter, just 3 sentences. "Nolan, keep paying the debt. Heal. I'm praying you'll learn the worth of an honest dollar. No love, no, I miss you." But I knew it was the gentlest, most appropriate answer I could give. At the end of the month, Arthur visited during a business trip to Denver. He brought new files, financial updates, and a small envelope. "We've locked every channel they could exploit, from linked accounts and insurance to old credit profiles. Everything is now in your name and protected with biometric authentication. No one can access anything without your fingerprint." I smiled. "Sounds like a spy movie." Arthur chuckled. "In this era, seniors deserve that level of protection. And honestly, it's rare to see someone as steady as you, calm through the whole process." I answered softly. "I just don't want to live in fear of someone else's signature ever again." Grant showed up after with a flyer. "Look at this. The city library has a digital skills for seniors course, how to spot phishing emails, protect your info, and manage accounts online." I laughed. "Are you calling me outdated?" He smiled kindly. "No, I want you modern enough that no one can trick you again." So I signed up. In week 1, I learned to recognize fake texts, check bank domains carefully, and report suspicious activity. In week 2, I learned to set strong passwords and store data safely. Each feature I understood made me feel a little stronger, as if the walls of a new fortress were going up solid, no more breaches. The instructor, a man in his 30s, said, "The best part is Mrs. Paula isn't afraid to ask questions. People are only weak when they're afraid to learn." I smiled. I was a nurse. If I could learn to stitch wounds, I can learn to protect my digital wallet. That night I went home, brewed chamomile tea, opened my account list on the computer, and looked at the clear, balanced numbers. No one else touching them, no mysterious transfers. Those numbers weren't just money, they were proof of freedom. Grant dropped by and saw me typing a password. He grinned. "You look professional," I said. "Don't forget, I used to run an ICU unit. Online accounts are just digital IV lines." We both laughed. That sound hadn't filled a room so naturally in a long time, unweighted by memories. After Grant left, I sat alone. Outside, snow fell quietly, streetlights reflecting on the window pane. I looked at Harold's photo and whispered, "See, love, I did it. I'm not just surviving, I'm living in peace. Inside me, no resentment, no why. Everything had returned to its place, my son learning how to be decent again, me learning to trust myself." When the clock struck 9 p.m., I closed the laptop, turned out the light, and headed to bed. No fear of being jolted awake at night, no haunting memory of $37, only stillness and safety, the kind I spent a lifetime finding again. I climbed into bed, pulled up the blanket, and smiled into the dark. For the first time, I understood deeply that justice is sometimes not punishment, but the quiet of no longer having to be on guard. I closed my eyes. Outside, the snow kept falling softly, as if the world itself were breathing lightly with me. And in that sleep, I knew, at last, I was truly at peace. Early morning, I made a cup of hot cocoa and stood by the window, looking at the Rocky Mountains blushing with dawn. The sun had just lifted over the far ridge, bathing the room in a grip, gentle, warm light, like a hand resting on my shoulder. Outside, last night's snow was melting on the sill. I heard Grant's footsteps from the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air. He leaned on the doorway and asked softly, "What are you thinking, Paula?" I smiled, turning the cup so the steam drifted up evenly. "Wondering what freedom tastes like." "And now I know it tastes like toast with salted butter." Grant laughed. And I laughed too, not the kind of laugh you force to look strong, but a real, simple, weightless laugh. Freedom, it turns out, isn't something grand. It's being able to make your own cocoa in the morning, to spend your own money, to say no without fear of punishment. On the table, a small recorder was waiting. Today I decided to record the final chapter of my journey, not for the court, not for any legal file, but for people who might be quietly living in the dark the way I once did. I pressed record, and my voice came slow and clear. This is Paula Whitaker, 70 years old. A year ago, I lived on half a cup of instant noodles a day, in a house with no furniture. Today, I have a home, accounts in my own name, and I can breathe without fear. I used to think justice meant making someone pay, but justice is actually when you're no longer being taken from. I relearned how to live, how to trust, and most importantly, how to protect myself. I paused, took a deep breath, then continued. If you're listening and you see yourself in this story, know that you're not alone. There are laws, and there are people like me, like Grant, like Arthur, like therapists we understand, and we believe you. Don't stay silent. Don't be ashamed. Help is there, you only need to knock. I stopped the recording, played back a bit, then saved the file titled, "From Instant Noodles to a New Start, The Journey of Paula Whitaker." I smiled, set the recorder down, and felt I had closed a long chapter, not with tears, but with a peaceful breath. At noon, Grant took me to the park nearby. The grass was still dewy. A few kids played with a golden retriever. Denver's air is always clear, as if this place was made for healing. Sitting on a wooden bench, I opened my little notebook and wrote down plans for the next year. I didn't want to run from the past anymore. I wanted to use it to help others. My plan had 3 parts. 1. Give talks at the senior center, sharing a personal financial protection checklist, how to manage PINs, statements, wills, and account access. 2. Join the Second Light Network, providing legal support for older women facing financial abuse. 3. Publish my audio journal not to complain, but to show that getting back up at 70 isn't unreasonable. Grant read it and nodded. Sounds like a recovery plan, I answered, half joking, half serious. No, it's a plan to keep living properly. In the afternoon, as sunlight poured through the curtains, I took Harold's photo from the shelf. In it, he still wore that gentle smile, the one that steadied me for decades. I touched the glass lightly and said, "I saved myself, Harold. Maybe late, but in time. I believe if he were here, he'd be proud. I saved so many people as a nurse, but only now did I learn how to save myself." That evening, a letter from Nolan arrived. The envelope had the familiar handwriting, but this time I didn't hesitate. I opened it and read slowly. No choking, no trembling, just a calm, unlike before. My son wrote that work was steady, he was still paying on time, and he was about to volunteer with an organization that helps victims of financial abuse. I folded the letter and put it in a box. No tears, no anger. Because I know sometimes someone else's remorse isn't a gift for us, it's a reward they need to keep living. Late at night, I turned on the desk lamp and wrote a note for anyone who might find my story by chance. If someone is controlling your money, making you afraid to ask about your own account, if you have to ask permission to buy medicine or food, if you're called useless or told you don't understand the times, stop and remember, that isn't love. That is abuse, even when no fist is raised. But you have the right to live differently. You have the right to keep your own money. And there are people who will believe you and help you. I set down the pen, feeling my heartbeat slow light as a dawn breath. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't an instant duty, it's a process. I don't have to force myself to love anyone just to look noble. I only have to stop letting resentment run my life. Outside, the sky turned a soft orange. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Last night's snow had mostly melted, leaving faint patches like memories. I took a deep breath. Denver's air is dry and cold, but not bitter. The sun slanted low, my shadow shortening the sign of a longer day. Grant came out with a slice of fresh toast. I took a bite. The butter melted, rich and warm. I looked at him and smiled. So this is what true freedom tastes like, ordinary, but so good it brings tears. He simply said, "You deserve it, Paula." I nodded, eyes lifting to the Rockies, where the last rays still stretched across the sky. And in that moment, I knew. My journey wasn't over, it was just changing direction, from survival to guiding those still being starved. I turned and walked back inside. Light spilled through the doorway, washing over every frame, every stack of books, every note I'd reclaimed from my old life. A new day was beginning, and I was finally living fully in my own sunrise. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of this journey. If you're still listening, maybe your heart carries a wound like mine, the wound of being belittled, used, or made to forget your own worth. I only want to say this. You're not alone. There are people like me, like Grant, like so many others who fell, stood back up, and found themselves again. Tell me where you're listening from, a small town or a windy city. Because maybe your story will be the rope that pulls someone else out of the dark. If this story touched you, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, and share, not for me, but for those still suffering in silence who don't yet know there's a way out. I'm grateful for every heart that listened. And I promise, in every story to come, I'll keep telling so anyone who's been hurt can believe. Dignity doesn't fade with time. Justice is never too late. And light always finds its way back.